Hey friends, welcome to part 2 of how to make a crossbody bag. Let's jump straight into it because we've got a lot to do. Okay, so to attach the zip to the top gusset, you're going to need, well, you don't need, but a zip guide is super helpful for this because you don't want to get any glue at all on the visible part of the zip tape. You'll see it in the final product and it will look like, well, something I don't want to have to bleep out, so it won't look amazing. But the best way of doing this is to use a zip guide. This one I had made, it's made of brass, but you can get them online. If you Google zip guide, you'll find one very easily, or contact me and we can get something sorted. So you're going to need the zip guide again so that you can position the top gusset properly. So take your time with this because you want to get it right up against the zip guide, but you don't want to get it away from the zip guide because it needs to be really even. So when you're doing this, make sure your zip guide is exactly in position. You can do it without, but it is far easier with it. So once you've done the top side and hammered it in position, flip it over and do exactly the same thing on the back side using your zip guide. I'm thinking about putting them on my website, so let me know if you would like me to do that and I will get something sorted. So do let me know in the description box below if you would like me to put zip guides on my website. I'm using a calf skin for the interior, and all the information about the thicknesses of the leather are in the pattern, the downloadable PDF pattern that's on my website, so go check that out. So now you're going to want to prick mark down the side of your zipper. You're going to want to do this at 3mm. Well, that's the distance I use anyway. Feel free to have a play around with that, but I find 3mm looks the nicest, especially when you're using a 1.5mm creasing iron, which is what I use. I do absolutely love stitching, so you are going to see a little bit of that in the video. So with the termination of the stitch at the end of your zip, because you're not fully laminating the any of the exterior with the lining, you can tie a knot between the exterior and the lining and it will turn out really well because you won't ever see that knot. And the great thing about never fully laminating the two layers together is if you ever want to repair your bag, it's much easier, and if there's a knot you can just snip the knot off. So we're going to do exactly the same thing for the front panel. We're going to use the same zip guide. We're going to allowing us to get the glue line exactly the same thing on the front panel and the back panel, of course, with the exterior leather and the interior leather. Now for the front pocket, I'm going to use fabric for this. I don't often use fabric, and you can use leather for this. However, what I've found is that if you use a leather, unless you use something that's like 0.5mm, for example, it does get quite bulky. So I'm going to use a fabric for the pocket. Again, feel free to use leather. However, what I've found is if you're doing this by hand, which obviously the majority of you will be, putting a little strip of leather between the layer of fabric and the front panel allows you to get a much stronger stitching line, because obviously we're saddle stitching this, and if you can do it without. Again, with everything, I know I keep saying you can do it without. It's just a bit of a disclaimer because I don't want to get a whole bunch of comments saying, oh, can you do it without this? Can you do it without that? Yes, you can. The thing about leatherwork is there is, technically speaking, absolutely no right or wrong answer. It doesn't exist. So, little disclaimer aside, everything you can do with or without. So let's move on. With the shapes, or shapes, depending on how you want to pronounce it, it's going to be, we're going to use two of them because this is going to be a shoulder bag or crossbody. However, if you just want to use this as a day-to-day bag, I would personally just do one, so you can put like a wrist strap on it, for example. but we're going to use this as a crossbody bag, and so therefore we're going to use 2 shapes. I know it's a little bit out of order, but that's because that's how my footage came off my camera, and I'm not the best editor in the world. So we're going to have these 2 shapes. We're going to cut them out. The pattern is in the description. And then we're going to simply stitch around them. However, we're going to put the stitching marks in. We're going to glue them together, obviously, with the D-ring there. But we're not going to stitch them. We're going to paint them. We're not going to stitch them yet, because we don't want to stitch them and then attach them to the bag. We want to paint them because you won't be able to get at them once they're attached. Basically, you're stitching them to the bag, but you want to paint them first because you won't be able to paint them with them stitched to the bag. You could try. I don't think it would go very well. So this is the bottom gusset. This is what we're going to be gluing and stitching the shapes to. And like with everything, I bend over the stitch line. Sorry, my cat is driving me fucking mental. As I'm doing, every time I do these voiceovers, my cat drives me bonkers. He decides that because I'm talking, it's time for his attention. When you're gluing your lining to your gusset exterior or panel, when you're gluing your lining to your exterior leather, it's really, really important that you get as close to 90-degree bend at this point as you can, because if you glue them flat, once you attach them to the bag and you have that 90-degree bend there for the piping, you'll get a really, really wrinkled lining. So I would highly recommend putting that 90-degree bend in. We're going to seal the edges. These don't need to be magnificent. Yes, they're on the outside and you can spend lots and lots of time painting this, but for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm not going to. Again, with the back to the shapes, because you're going to be hanging this bag, and if you put any weight in it at all, you're going to be hanging this off the shoulder strap. You want to put, this is non-stretch tape, you want to put non-stretch tape in there because over time that will stretch. Yes, it's got the bonded leather, but it will stretch. So let's put our little logo, my new logo, which I'm super, super proud of, on that. You can do it before you, in fact, I would personally do it before you put the zip in the pocket in, but I forgot, I'll be totally honest with you. So we're going to put the lining onto the exterior of the front panel, and we're going to do exactly the same technique we normally do. We're going to bend it over to that 90-degree bend, and then we're going to do that all the way around. I've lifted it off the table just because it makes it a little bit easier for me to put that bend in. And take your time with this, because this is the shape that your bag will be. So take your time, really put some effort into how you put this bend in there, and you'll be golden. When it comes to going around the corners, it is not a very, very easy thing to do. So I forgot to record it, so that's my apologies for that. But take your time going around the corner. I use pliers to put this to put the 90-degree in. You can just use your fingers for this, but I find it much easier. And if you have leather pliers, or you can just get some normal pliers and wrap them in leather, they don't have to be anything special. That is literally all leather pliers are, is pliers wrapped in leather. And we're going to do the same thing again for the top gusset. We're going to bend the edge down. So I'm having a bit of brain fart today, and I have no idea why. So the edge of the ends of the top gusset won't be visible from the outside, so it's up to you how well you want to finish those, because you won't be able to see those from the exterior. They're going to be inside the bag. So maybe put a bit of edge paint there just to seal it, but it's not necessary to go absolutely crazy on it, because once you flip the bag inside out, you'll never see it. So for the piping is something that is quite a trick to do, And once you've learnt it, it is magnificently easy. You can draw a line down the middle before you've put the glue in if you would like. However, it is not strictly necessary, and it's only there to guide you to see where that middle is, because once you've pinched those edges together, it will find the middle. But make sure you've pinched it together really well, because this is the sandwich of the stitch, shall we say. So a little trick: if you put your piping up against a ruler that's the same height as the piping dimensions again are in the PDF pattern available on my website in the link in description. So once you've put your piping against a ruler, and use a bone folder, because you want to get that crease really tight, because the tighter that crease, the nicer your stitch line and easier it'll be to stitch it. It's not easy going around these corners. I've sped this up to 8 times speed and it's still taking bloody ages to do it. It's not easy, but the whole purpose of doing it like this is so you don't have to cut 8 million darts around the edge of your bag. I personally don't like the looks of that. I find it looks nicer from the inside of the bag to do it this way. If you want to cut darts and then fold and then have it flat, and essentially those darts will close once you stitch it, feel free. I put the you'll have to go back to the part 1 of how to make a crossbody bag. It's on my channel to see how I put the phone pocket on the inside of it. That's in part 1. So don't forget to go there and check that out. But this is a little nifty trick, I can't remember where I learned it, of not having a visible join on your piping. Traditionally, you'd put the 2 ends together and then you'd put a little wrap over the top, and you will see a big chunky wrap over the top. This makes it nigh on invisible. The closer you get that skive to 0, I've got a video on how to do this on my channel, so go check that out. The closer you get that skive to 0, the more invisible that join will be. So you want to get it really nicely done, and then it will be practically invisible. You want to get this is the stitch line of where you're going to be putting that, stitching through the gussets. You want to get your pricking each side of the join, so that when you stitch it, it pulls that join together and it becomes really nice and tight. You might notice that I've sanded a bit of the gusset, the piping off. A lot of leather, in fact most leathers that have a finish, won't stick to each other. They won't stick to each other. So you want to, any surface that you're trying to adhere with leather, make sure that you've taken the surface off, because you won't get a good bond if it's a bond that you need to be strong. Some glue bonds are just there to hold it until you've put a stitch mark down, let's be honest. However, if it's a glue join you want to be permanent, you want to take the surface off the leather itself. You want to either sand it off, scratch it off, whatever it is that you deem the best way of doing it, you want to do that. Because if you don't, that glue won't penetrate into the fibers. Think about it like skin, because that is exactly what leather is. This is a 10mm overlap, by the way. The gusset has a 10mm overlap from the top to the bottom. Think about it like skin. Skin doesn't stick to much because it's very waterproof and very little penetrates it. So leather is exactly the same. We're gonna stitch the same with our 3mm gap on this, and this is I've stuck a ruler in there just because it's really annoying to stitch something that's a circle, because it keeps flopping down. But you're welcome to stitch one and then the other, it might be a little bit easier. So scratch off the back of the shape. I tried using a awl, but it really didn't work very well. By the way, the padding that's inside that, you can do it flat, but the padding that's inside that shape is 1.1. It's the same as the exterior leather, 1.1 millimeter. That, and the shape is wrapped around that. Just because I like stuff with a bit of padding, to have a padded effect. I like it much more than flat stuff. I just do. So when I'm stitching this, I'm stitching it with an awl. You can stick the shape to the gusset and then prick mark through with the holes you've already put on there and then stitch it. Or you can do it with an awl and yeah, but you do need practice with an awl before you do this, because you want the stitch line on the inside to be nice, because if you do open the bag and look inside, you'll see the imprint of those stitches on the inside. And this is exactly why I like a padded aspect on my work, because I just think it looks much nicer once you've tapped it down and you have that really sort of raised effect. Like I was saying before, you want to sand off the finish of the leather. So this does this is the gusset obviously, and it won't stick to the piping if you don't sand it off. So you want to sand a little bit of that off, trim the lining off both the panels and the gusset, because if you don't trim the lining off first, it'll be a bit of a nightmare to line it up all properly afterwards. Bit of glue on the edge, bit of glue on the gusset, and then wait for that glue to get completely tacky, because if you try and stick these together when they're wet, you'll have a nightmare trying to line this all up. Now once you flip the gusset inside out, because obviously these bags are stitched from the inside out, you want to put a little center point on the top and the bottom gusset, because if you do this wrong and you line up the gusset and the panel wrong, you'll have a skew bag. It'll be really wonky, which is a bit annoying. So the pattern does include a center point on the front and back panels, and where you glue the two ends of the gusset together, where you glue the two parts of the gusset together on the pattern is your center point as well. So you'll have these on the pattern. It will make life really easy. And then stick the long side together and then the short side together. Make sure that it's the right way up. Don't put your pocket on upside down. I have done that too many times. I've had to take the entire bloody bag apart to reattach it. So make sure your pockets are the right way up. Glue the long side and the short side together using the center points that are provided to you. And then stick the short sides together, again with the center points that are on the pattern. And then you can go around the corner, but don't stretch it, because again you will have an absolute nightmarish time if you stretch this. And now it's time for 3 years of stitching. This took about a day to get all of it through. I'm using a 0.55, so quite a thick thread, because this is a lot of leather to go through. And you'll notice I'm using a roundel. You can't stitch this without, well, you can theoretically, but it's much harder to stitch this without an awl. And you're stitching backwards, because you're stitching through the underside of the pricking holes that you made in the gusset. Does that make sense? In the panel, sorry. You've prick marked through the piping, and now you're putting your awl through the back side of those stitch marks. So technically speaking, you're stitching backwards. So once you've stitched the back half on, or the front half, depending on which way round you've decided to do this, it makes absolutely no difference. So if you're wondering, oh, do I stitch the front panel on first? Do I stitch the back panel on first? It makes absolutely no difference, so you don't need to worry about that. Just make sure that your pockets are the right way up. What I found really helpful was after you've stitched the one panel on, put a weight inside the bag. So undo the bag, put a weight inside of it, and then you will not have any issues with the bag flying off into the nether every time you pull the threads tight. Don't try and stitch around this bag with one length of thread. It will take you years just pulling the thread through the hole. Do a length of thread, an arm length of thread, an arm span of thread, whatever you want to call it, and then back stitch twice with a little bit of glue in each hole, in the hole to terminate it, and use probably 2 or 3 lengths of thread. It'll make your life infinitely easier doing it that way, because this takes a long time. You can see that it's gotten dark because I've been stitching this 4 hours. And yes, I have had to show you, because if I have to sit through it, you have to sit through it. Normally, I don't use a Dremel. I sand by hand, but when you've got 1.5 centimeters of leather and it's all covered in glue from when you've stitched the bloody thing together, I use a Dremel. Now, this doesn't need to be perfect because this is the inside, and you want to take the top off. You want to make it nice and flat, and then you want to put a stupidly heavy layer of glue, of edge paint on this. You could burnish it, you could bind it, you could do a whole bunch of stuff. I have decided to paint it, which is the norm for doing this sort of thing. And you want a huge amount of edge paint on, but not so much that it dribbles down onto the lining and ruins your life. So after you've flattened it with your Dremel, obviously, put a really dense coat of edge paint on this, and then leave it for several hours, or put it under a heater or something, so that it penetrates that leather really nicely. And it will make your job much easier, because after you've edge painted it and sealed that, we're only doing one coat of edge paint on this. God, I'm sanding for years. You only want to do one coat of edge paint, because we're going to use our creasing iron. We're going to turn it essentially red hot, and we're going to seal that edge paint on there. You don't need to get that edge paint perfectly flat, because you're never going to see it again. Now, this is the part that is a bit of a nightmare. I'm using a hairdryer, just because you want to get that leather nice and warm, so that you don't damage your leather when you're flipping it, because warm leather doesn't crack, cold leather cracks. And yes, I have sped this up, because it was like, I don't know, 10 minutes of flipping this thing, so I have sped it up. But you do want to do it quite quickly, because the slower you do this, the more damage you put in the leather, because you're turning the leather inside out. You then want to put the creases in, essentially massage the bag so you get a really nice clean edge, and then you're going to stuff it with a pillow or a towel, or I think I used a towel. You could use a t-shirt, because the leather needs to be heated up so that it gets a shape back into it. Creases go away when they're warm. You want to heat it up, and if you really want, you can steam it, which will also help getting the creases out. I decided to steam it, but also my client wanted this to look a little bit aged. She didn't like the look. She didn't like the idea of a very fancy new bag looking thing. So when I steamed it, I put water droplets on it. And when you've finished steaming it, let it cool down so the whole bag can settle. into its new shape. And the last thing to do is put your zip pullers on. You can have a bit of fun with these, but the pattern is also in my PDF pattern pack. And there we go. Thank you guys so much for watching. This was super fun to make. I really enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. And the pattern for this amazing thing will be in the description box below. The link to it on my website, of course. And I will see you next time. Have a fantastic weekend. Is it weekend? Week. I'll see you later.